The distant hum of the ship's engines echoed through the small, cramped cabin as the salvage crew gathered around the monitor. The signal was faint, almost lost in the endless void of space. It was a distress call, a faint whisper amid the stars. The crew leader, Captain Nilla Doran, furrowed her brow as she zoomed in on the signal source. An escape pod, drifting slowly near the edge of a quarantine system. The lumen arrow was nowhere in sight, but the pod was unmistakable, its markings and insignia clear. The faint signal came from the pod's distress beacon, and it had been broadcasting for hours, maybe days. Nilla knew what that meant. If there was a survivor, they had been alone for far too long. "Prepare for retrieval," Nilla ordered. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. The quarantine zone was off-limits to civilian ships, and the lumen arrow had been operating in an area known for its danger. No one had heard from the vessel in over a week. This might not be a simple rescue mission. The salvage crew went into action, running through the procedures with practiced precision. They secured the pod, pulling it into the bay with the faintest of groans as it scraped along the hull. A low hiss came from the pod's outer shell as the airlock was depressurized, and the crew anxiously waited for the internal systems to unlock. When the door finally creaked open, they saw him. Commander Elias Vance. His once pristine uniform, now a ragged version of its former self, clung to his frail frame. His skin was pale, his eyes sunken, but there was something about his presence, something oddly calm for someone who had just been through the unimaginable. He didn't stagger or fall into their arms like a typical survivor. He stood, unsteady but composed, as though he had spent the last few days in a deep meditation, not trapped in the vacuum of space. "Commander Vance," Nilla said, her voice softening. "We're here to help. How are you holding up?" Vance looked at her with eyes that had seen too much, his face almost expressionless. His mouth barely twitched as he spoke. "The lumen arrow was attacked," he said, his voice gravelly but steady. "I was the only one who made it out." Nilla exchanged glances with the other crew members. There was a somber note in his voice, a conviction that left no room for doubt. The crew leader's instincts told her something wasn't right, but there was no time for second-guessing. They had a survivor to take care of. "How did you survive?" another crew member asked. His voice was curious, but the question seemed almost irrelevant compared to the shock of finding someone alive. "I managed to escape in the pod," Vance said, his gaze distant. "I didn't have much time. The ship was already lost by the time I reached the pod. There were too many enemy forces. I barely made it out alive." Nilla nodded, signaling to her crew to start tending to his wounds. He was clearly dehydrated, malnourished, and injured, but alive. Alive enough to speak. Alive enough to tell this tale. But there was something about the way Vance spoke. His words were precise, his eyes sharp. Far too sharp for someone who had just gone through the trauma of witnessing the destruction of his ship. It was as if his mind had never broken. Instead of despair, there was a strange calmness to him, a calmness that unsettled the crew. As they helped him to the medical bay, Nilla couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a rescue. They had found a survivor, but they might have just stumbled upon a story that was far darker than any of them could have imagined. She glanced back at Vance, whose expression remained unchanged, as if the horrors of space had never touched him. In that moment, she knew one thing for sure. This rescue wasn't going to be as simple as it seemed. The sterile white walls of Earth Command's debriefing room felt cold and impersonal as Commander Elias Vance sat across from a panel of military officials. His uniform had been replaced with a simple jumpsuit, the insignia removed, and his hands rested calmly in his lap. Despite the circumstances, his posture remained rigid, as if this room, despite being a place of intense scrutiny, was nothing more than another station in his mission. He had been through worse. Captain Nilla Doran sat at the head of the table, flanked by officers who had been tasked with processing the details of the lumen arrow's destruction. Their eyes flickered occasionally to the screen where they could watch the live feed of Vance's debriefing. The air was thick with anticipation, but there was an unspoken sense of dread that no one dared to voice aloud. They were waiting for him to speak, to provide the missing piece of the puzzle they had all been struggling to solve. Vance finally broke the silence, his voice steady and measured as he began his recounting. It was a sudden attack. We never saw it coming. The Drith, an alien species we had no prior intelligence on, had already infiltrated our systems. We didn't even have a chance to send a distress signal before they disabled our communication network. The officers listened intently, their eyes fixed on him, though none of them could deny the nagging doubt growing in their minds. The Drith were a well-known enemy, cold, calculating, and highly advanced, but they weren't known for attacking without provocation. Yet, Vance's words painted a picture of chaos, and for a moment, his tale was almost convincing. The attack was swift. Vance continued, his voice gaining strength. They disabled our navigation systems, trapped us in a sector we couldn't escape from, and began tearing through the hull. They were after something on the ship. I don't know what, but I was tasked with safeguarding the crew and the mission's objective. His gaze turned distant, as though replaying the scene in his mind. When the breach happened, I realized that it was too late for everyone else. The Drith had us cornered, and I was forced to make the call. I activated the self-destruct sequence to prevent them from gaining access to whatever classified data was on board. I barely made it to the pod. Nella nodded as Vance spoke, her brow furrowed in concentration. She'd heard stories of battles fought in the void, but nothing had prepared her for the gravity of Vance's tale. If what he said was true, then the Lumen Arrow had been a mission of unimaginable importance, a secret mission compromised by an alien force who had anticipated their every move. One of the officers, Lieutenant Harrow, spoke up, breaking the tension. "And the rest of the crew, Commander? You say they couldn't escape. Why did you leave them behind?" Vance's eyes flickered for just a moment, but his composure didn't falter. "They weren't capable of getting to the pod in time," he said evenly. "I did what I could, but I wasn't going to let the mission fail completely. I had to survive to warn Earth. There was no other choice." Harrow's questions seemed to hang in the air, unanswered, as his fellow officers exchanged uneasy glances. The story, though tragic, had a certain weight to it. There was just one thing bothering them: the footage from the Lumen Arrow's black box. "We'll need to corroborate your statement, Commander," Captain Doran said, her voice neutral, though there was an edge to it. "We'll review the ship's data logs and security footage to verify your account." Vance's gaze never wavered. "I understand," he said simply, "but I assure you, the footage will be altered. It's the only explanation. The Drith are known for their ability to tamper with data, manipulate evidence." The officers in the room exchanged looks, but none spoke. They had heard of the Drith's advanced tech, but even they weren't sure it was capable of manipulating footage to such an extent. As the debriefing continued, Nella couldn't help but notice the subtle tension in Vance's demeanor. His story was flawless, too polished to be the tale of a man who had just witnessed his world torn apart. There was something deeper at play here, and she couldn't shake the feeling that Vance was hiding the truth, or worse, that he didn't even know what it was. The meeting ended with no clear answers, only more questions. As the officers left, Nella remained in the room, staring at Vance for a moment longer. She had seen the flicker in his eyes when he spoke of the attack, the brief hesitation before he explained the deaths of his crew. She wasn't sure what to make of it, but she knew one thing. The Lumen Arrow was not the first ship to fall to the Drith, and Elias Vance was not just any survivor. Nella could feel it in her gut. The real story had yet to be told. Back at Earth Command, the tension was palpable as the debriefing room emptied. The footage from the Lumen Arrow was now in the hands of the analysts, and everyone knew this would be the moment that either confirmed Commander Elias Vance's story or shattered it completely. For hours, the team sifted through the ship's black box data, their eyes scanning every byte of information, every flicker on the screen. Every piece of footage was meticulously examined, looking for something, anything, that would back up Vance's tale. The clock ticked away as the team worked tirelessly, replaying the final moments of the Luminero. When the first footage file was decrypted, the image on the screen was a chaotic mess of static and broken signals. But as the analysts continued, a clearer picture began to emerge. The security footage showed the ship's interior in its final moments. Panic spread across the crew as alarms blared and red lights flashed. The crew moved through the halls, rushing to escape the impending destruction. But then, something strange caught their attention. It wasn't the Drith. It wasn't the alien forces that Vance had described. Instead, the footage revealed something far more disturbing. Commander Vance, dressed in his uniform, was seen moving with unnerving calm through the corridors. He bypassed locked doors and disabled security systems, all with a practiced ease that suggested he knew exactly where he was going. The crew scrambled behind him, but Vance was always one step ahead. As the ship's destruction became imminent, the footage showed him locking down critical areas of the vessel, sealing off sections where the crew had been located. It wasn't the Drith that had killed them. It was Vance himself, preventing anyone from escaping. The analysts froze in disbelief. This wasn't the picture of a man trying to save his crew. It was the image of a man controlling the situation, orchestrating the demise of those on board. "Wait," one of the analysts muttered, rewinding the footage. "Look at this." The ship's self-destruct was activated manually by Commander Vance. The footage confirmed it. With a few deft movements, Vance had initiated the sequence that would seal the ship's fate. The self-destruct countdown began, but there was no sign of the Drith, no sign of an alien attack. The crew was left to scramble for their lives, but all escape routes were blocked by the commander himself. The camera panned across the now empty corridors, lingering on Vance as he entered the escape pod bay. And that's when it happened. The final frame of the footage revealed Vance, alone, entering the pod, his face stoic, unaffected by the chaos he had just caused. He didn't flinch, didn't show a hint of regret. He climbed into the pod and initiated its launch sequence, leaving behind a wrecked ship, an abandoned crew, and a trail of destruction. The room fell silent as the footage ended. The analysts exchanged uneasy glances, their minds racing to make sense of what they had just seen. The images didn't align with Vance's story. If the Lumen Arrow had been attacked, why was he the one who had triggered its destruction? Why was he so calm, so methodical, as if it had all been part of the plan? "Prepare a report," Captain Nilla Doran said, her voice flat, yet tinged with something unspoken. "We need to get this footage to Vance. He's going to explain this." The team members nodded, but no one seemed eager to face the commander again. The doubt was starting to spread. The man who had claimed to be the sole survivor of a brutal alien attack, who had told them a story of loss, betrayal, and survival, was now a man whose actions spoke of something far more calculated, far darker. Nala stared at the screen, her mind racing. There was no way to deny what they had just witnessed. The footage was clear. Vance had destroyed his own ship. He had killed his crew. But why? What had driven him to such lengths? And what did he have to hide? The only thing Nella knew for certain now was that the rescue mission, the story of survival, had been a lie. The question now was not how Vance survived, but why he had done what he did. And that question would have to be answered soon. The truth, whatever it was waiting to be uncovered. Commander Elias Vance sat in a cold, gray interrogation room, his hands resting calmly on the table in front of him. The stark lighting overhead cast harsh shadows on his face, but he didn't flinch. He had been through far worse. The door opened, and Captain Nilla Doran walked in, followed by Lieutenant Harrow and a few other officers from Earth Command. Their expressions were tense, but there was a certain focus in their eyes, an unspoken determination. They had questions, and they weren't leaving until they had answers. Vance didn't look up as they entered. He knew why they were here. The footage had already told them everything they needed to know. The ship's destruction, the crew's deaths, the self-destruct sequence, all of it pointed to him. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't understand, was the why. They needed him to explain the inexplicable. "Commander Vance," Captain Doran began, her voice calm but edged with authority. "We've reviewed the footage from the Luminero. What we saw doesn't match the story you told us. You were the one who initiated the self-destruct sequence. You locked your crew in place. You killed them." Vance remained silent for a long moment. His gaze was distant, as if he were looking through them, seeing something far beyond this room. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and steady. "I did what was necessary." Lieutenant Harrow leaned forward, his tone sharp. "Necessary? You killed your entire crew. The footage shows you locking down sections of the ship while everyone else scrambled to survive. You trapped them. You left them behind." Vance's eyes finally met theirs, his expression unchanging. "You don't understand. They were already dead by then." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Harrow opened his mouth to speak, but Nala held up a hand, signaling for him to stop. She had a feeling that Vance wasn't finished. "They were infected," Vance continued, his voice almost a whisper. "The Drith. They had a way of controlling people, twisting their minds. Some of the crew had already been compromised before the attack even started. They had been feeding information to the Drith. I had to stop it before the entire mission was lost." Nala's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't what she had expected. In his calm tone, Vance's words almost sounded rational. He wasn't claiming he had acted out of fear or panic. He had made a calculated decision. But it didn't make sense. Why had he never mentioned this before? "You're saying the crew was compromised?" Nala asked, her voice quieter now, but still full of suspicion. "That they were working for the Drith?" Vance nodded slowly, his face unreadable. "Yes. The Drith have a technology, a way of planting suggestions, manipulating people without them even knowing. Some of the crew were already under their control. I couldn't risk them sabotaging the mission any further." "But you killed them all," Harrow shot back, his voice tinged with disbelief. "You didn't give them a chance to fight back, to prove they were still human." Vance's gaze hardened. They weren't human anymore. Not by the time I made the decision. They were walking liabilities, a threat to the entire operation. The Drith had already infiltrated the ranks. I was the only one who could stop them. Nala's mind was racing. His story was plausible, in a twisted way. If the Drith really had a technology capable of controlling minds, it could explain the crew's sudden and inexplicable behavior. But something still didn't sit right. Vance's actions, his coldness, the way he described everything. It all seemed too calculated, too detached. "You said you were the only one who could stop them," Nala said slowly, leaning in. "But why did you have to destroy the ship? Why not just disable the compromised crew members or eject them? Why kill everyone?" Vance's eyes flickered, but only for a moment. "I couldn't risk it," he said again, his voice now more forceful. Once the Drith had planted their seeds, there was no turning back. The entire mission would have been compromised. The only way to ensure Earth's safety was to destroy the ship and everyone on it. Nala stared at him, searching for any sign of remorse, any hint of humanity. But there was nothing. Vance's face remained a mask, and his words were cold, clinical. It was as if he had been trained to think this way, to make these kinds of decisions without hesitation. "Your actions were extreme, Commander," Nala said finally, her voice hardening. "And they've cost lives. If the Drith had control of the crew, why didn't you come forward sooner with this information? Why not warn us when you were rescued? You kept this hidden." Vance didn't flinch. "Because I knew no one would believe me," he said quietly. "I knew you wouldn't understand. You'd think I was just another survivor, just another man trying to explain away a tragedy. But I did what had to be done. And if you think I'm guilty, then fine. But I saved Earth." There was a long pause before Nella finally spoke, her voice steady but tinged with something darker. "We're not here to pass judgment yet, Commander. But your story doesn't add up, and we're not going to stop until we find the truth." Vance's gaze didn't waver. "You're wasting your time. The truth is already here." The interrogation room door slammed shut behind Captain Nilla Doran as she stepped out into the quiet hallway, the weight of Commander Elias Vance's words pressing heavily on her chest. The officers who had remained behind at Earth Command had all been listening to the conversation. Some were still processing what they had heard. Others were already making notes, preparing their own theories. But Nella couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were missing something vital. Vance's story didn't fit, his calm demeanor, the cold precision with which he described the crew's deaths. It all felt off. Yet there was something in his eyes, something that made her believe he wasn't lying about everything. She needed answers. And to find them, she had to dig deeper. "Captain," Harrow said, walking briskly up to her as she passed the debriefing room. His face was pale, eyes wide with confusion. "We've been going through the data again. There's something you need to see." Nella followed him into the nearby analysis bay, where a team of technicians were reviewing the data logs. The moment she entered, Harrow handed her a datavat. The screen displayed an encrypted file that had just been decrypted, one she hadn't seen before. It was an internal log from the Luminero, dated days before the alleged attack. "Where did this come from?" Nella asked, furrowing her brow. "It was buried deep in the system. We missed it earlier," Harrow replied. "This file wasn't accessible through regular channels. It's not part of the main data logs we were reviewing." Nella scrolled through the contents, her heart racing as the file began to reveal something she hadn't expected. It was a message from Commander Vance, only it wasn't a standard report or routine communication. This message had been addressed to a mysterious contact, someone outside of Earth Command. The timestamp on the message was clear. It had been sent just hours before the Luminero had supposedly been attacked by the Drith. The message was brief but chilling. "The package is ready for extraction. Make sure it gets to the designated coordinates. I've taken care of the rest. Once the operation is complete, the data will be in your hands." The words echoed in Nella's mind as she read them again. Vance had been in contact with someone before the supposed Drith attack. Someone who wasn't part of the mission. The package he referred to, it was unclear what it meant, but it was certain that Vance had known the Luminero was going to be compromised long before the Drith appeared on the scene. "Is this a joke?" Harrow asked, his voice laced with disbelief. "What the hell is this?" Nella's mind was spinning. "No, it's not a joke. This is something more. Vance didn't just happen to get caught in the middle of an attack. He was preparing for it. And he wasn't protecting the crew. He was part of something much bigger, something we don't fully understand." Harrow stepped closer, his face pale as realization settled in. "You think he was working with someone else? That this wasn't just a Drith attack?" "I'm not sure," Nella replied, her voice tight. "But I think the Drith were just the cover. Vance knew something was coming. The question is, what was he planning to extract? And who was he sending it to?" Nella's mind raced. This was no longer just about an alien attack or the Luminero. There was a much darker conspiracy at play here. Vance had used the Drith to cover his tracks, but there was more beneath the surface. The ship's destruction, the deaths of his crew. It was all part of a larger plan. But why? Before Nella could say anything else, another technician spoke up, interrupting her thoughts. "Captain, there's something else. We've been looking at the ship's manifest. There's a discrepancy in the inventory logs. One of the crates listed for delivery didn't match up with the contents. It's missing." Nella turned sharply. "What do you mean missing?" The technician hesitated. "It's an advanced prototype, something classified. It wasn't supposed to be part of the Luminero's cargo, but it was logged anyway, just before the mission began. There's no record of it being unloaded or destroyed, and it doesn't show up in any of the data we gathered. Could it be the package Vance mentioned? Harrow asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Nella's blood ran cold. The pieces were falling into place, but they didn't make any sense. Vance had been involved in something far more dangerous than just a simple sabotage operation. He had been preparing for this, whatever this was, and the Drith were just the distraction. We need to find out what this prototype is, Nella said, her voice urgent. And we need to find out what Vance is hiding before it's too late. As the realization of the scope of the situation set in, Nella's mind flashed back to Vance's calm demeanor during the interrogation. He had been hiding something. He had always known what was going to happen. But there was one thing he hadn't counted on. Earth Command was getting closer to the truth, and once they found it, nothing would ever be the same again. The hours dragged on as Captain Nulla Doran and Lieutenant Harrow worked tirelessly to unravel the mystery surrounding Commander Elias Vance. The more they uncovered, the more they realized that the truth was slipping further from their grasp. Each new piece of information only added to the complexity of the situation. What had started as a simple case of a doomed mission had turned into something much darker. An intricate web of deceit, betrayal, and a conspiracy that ran deeper than anyone could have anticipated. Captain, we found something. Harrow's voice broke through Nella's thoughts as he entered the command center, holding the new set of data files. His face was pale, a deep crease in his forehead betraying his anxiety. You need to see this. Nella didn't need any further prompting. She rose from her seat and followed Harrow to the central display, where the technician team had been working nonstop to sift through every file, every data log, and every encrypted message that had been recovered from the Lumen Arrow. The new data Harrow had brought was disturbing, to say the least. The screen flashed to life, revealing schematics of an experimental weapon. It wasn't anything Earth Command had authorized or even knew about. At least, not officially. The weapon was designed for one purpose: destabilization. A prototype that could cause widespread panic, disable entire fleets of ships, and potentially turn entire planets into little more than rubble. Where did this come from? Nella asked, her voice tight with disbelief. It's linked to the missing crate from the Lumen Arrow's manifest, Harrow explained. The one Vance mentioned in that message we found earlier. It's not just any piece of technology. It's a weapon, and it was supposed to be delivered to a classified facility. But for some reason, it never made it there. The crate was marked as delivered, but there's no record of it being opened, unpacked, or used. Nella's heart skipped a beat as she absorbed the information. The prototype wasn't just any piece of military hardware. It was a game changer. And Vance had been the one entrusted with it. But why would he keep this hidden? Nella mused aloud. And why would he destroy the ship to cover it up? We don't know yet, Harrow admitted, his voice grim. But one thing's for sure. Vance had to have known that the crate was vital. The entire mission was compromised because of it. If he had planned to extract it or deliver it to whoever he was working with, then the Drith were just a distraction. The attack was never the main event. Nella's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Vance had been so meticulous in his planning. He had lured the Drith into attacking, using them as a convenient scapegoat to mask his true mission. The destruction of the Lumen Arrow wasn't an accident. It was intentional. And the crew, they were collateral damage. We need to track this weapon, Nella said firmly, her resolve hardening. We need to find out who Vance was working with and why this weapon was so important. Before Harrow could respond, Nella turned to the technician team. Can we access any transmission logs? Anything that could give us a lead on who Vance was communicating with or where the weapon was supposed to go? The lead technician, a woman named Jansen, quickly pulled up a new set of logs on the screen. They were from the Lumen Arrow's last communication before its systems were sabotaged. The transmission was encrypted, but it had been flagged as unusual. Its source was unknown. The message contained only a set of coordinates, far from Earth's outer colonies. It pointed to a remote location, deep in uncharted space, one that hadn't been explored in decades. "These coordinates," Jansen said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "They're out in the frontier. It's an area no one's mapped. There's nothing out there, at least according to all official records." Nella felt a chill run down her spine. "The frontier? You're telling me there's a secret installation out there, and no one knows about it?" "That's what the coordinates suggest," Jansen replied. "It's as if someone intentionally wiped it from all public records." "Vance was headed to that location," Nella said, more to herself than anyone else. "He wasn't just surviving the Drith attack. He was delivering that weapon, and he knew exactly where he was going. He was working with someone on the other side of the galaxy, someone powerful enough to hide an entire facility in the most uncharted part of space." Harrow's voice interrupted her thoughts. "This doesn't make sense, Captain. Why would Vance destroy the ship, kill his crew, and risk everything for one weapon? What could be so important that he'd sacrifice so many lives?" Nella didn't answer immediately. She was thinking of the chilling message from Vance, the one that had mentioned a package that had been ready for extraction. It wasn't just the weapon, it was part of something much bigger. A deal. A trade. But with whom? And why had Vance gone so far to cover it up? "We need to get to those coordinates," Nella said firmly, her mind now set on one thing. "We need to find out what's out there and what Vance was willing to die for." She turned to the team. "Prepare a ship. We're going to the frontier. And this time, we're not just looking for a missing weapon. We're going to find the truth." As she left the room, the weight of the mission ahead settled heavily on her shoulders. What awaited them in the depths of the unknown was more dangerous than anything they could have imagined. But Nella knew one thing. The truth was out there, and she was going to find it. The journey to the coordinates was long and uneventful. Nella Doran stood at the helm of the Courageous, staring out at the black void of space. The stars glimmered in the distance, each one a distant reminder of what was at stake. With every passing hour, the ship ventured deeper into uncharted space, away from the safety of known space, and into the unknown. The coordinates led them into the frontier, a vast, lawless expanse of space that was rarely explored. Most ships steered clear of it, not out of fear, but because there was nothing there, just empty, uninhabited space. But now, as the ship approached the coordinates, Nella knew they were headed toward something far more dangerous, something hidden. The truth about Commander Ilias Vance's actions, and the weapon he had risked everything for, was waiting for them out here. "Captain, we're approaching the coordinates," Harrow's voice crackled over the comms. "We should be there in a few minutes." Nella nodded. She stood, her eyes fixed on the display in front of her. A series of markers flashed on the navigation system, showing a dense nebula ahead. It was a confusing mass of gas and particles that had been a navigational hazard for any ship that tried to cross it. To an untrained eye, it looked like nothing more than a cosmic dust storm. But Nella knew better. This was no natural anomaly. "Prepare the crew for possible turbulence," Nella ordered, her voice steady but laced with anticipation. "We don't know what we're walking into. Keep your eyes sharp." The tension was palpable as they crossed the threshold into the nebula. The ship's systems began to glitch momentarily as static interference filled the comms, but they pressed forward, cutting through the cloud of particles. The sensors were nearly useless here, the nebula's particles blocking most readings. Nella couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Captain, we've found something." Harrow's voice came through again, a hint of disbelief in his tone. "There's a structure up ahead. It's not natural. This is definitely man-made." Nella's heart raced. A structure. In the middle of nowhere, in the deepest part of the frontier. The coordinates had led them straight to it. "Bring us in closer," Nella said, her voice tight with urgency. "Let's see what we're dealing with." The Courageous descended through the swirling nebula, its engines humming as the crew braced for the unknown. The structure loomed ahead, its jagged edges barely visible through the thick clouds of gas. It looked like a fortress, large, imposing, and ancient, but the technology it was made from was anything but old. The surface of the structure gleamed with advanced materials, ones that Earth Command had never seen before. As they approached, a faint signal blinked on the ship's scanners. It wasn't a distress call, nor was it a standard communication. It was an encrypted transmission, too complex for even the Courageous's security systems to crack. Who could be sending this? Harrow muttered, staring at the screens. We need to find out. Nayla replied. Lock onto that signal. Let's see if we can force a connection. The crew worked quickly, attempting to hack into the transmission. Minutes stretched by in silence, broken only by the sound of beeping consoles. Finally, the signal gave way. The encryption cracked, and a message appeared on the screen. It was short, direct, and chilling. Vance, package received. Proceed with Phase 2. Nayla's blood ran cold. The message was meant for Vance, and it confirmed what she had feared. He had delivered the weapon, and whatever phase of the operation he had started, it was far from over. Captain, this structure, it's not just a base, Harrow said, his voice strained. It's a facility, a lab, and there's activity inside. Who's there? Nayla asked, though she already had a sinking feeling in her gut. Unknown, Harrow replied. There's no record of any facility like this in the frontier, at least none that should exist. It's as if this place is off the grid, completely erased from any known database. Nayla's thoughts were racing. Vance had known about this place. He had delivered the weapon here for a reason, but the true purpose of this mission was still a mystery. Was he part of a larger conspiracy? Was this facility linked to something even more dangerous than the Drith? Prepare an infiltration team, Nayla said firmly. We're going inside. This ends here. The decision was made. They were going to land the Courageous and enter the facility, no matter what it took. The team quickly gathered their gear, weapons primed and ready for whatever might await them inside. As the Courageous slowly descended toward the facility, Nayla couldn't help but feel the weight of what they were about to uncover. She had thought the Lumen Arrow disaster was the end of the story, but now she realized that it was only the beginning. The truth about Vance, the weapon, and the shadowy organization behind it all. It was all waiting inside, and she was about to find it. The Courageous landed softly on the cold, metallic surface of the hidden facility, its engines humming quietly as the crew prepared to disembark. Nayla Doran led the charge, her boots clicking sharply against the floor as she exited the ship with Harrow and a small tactical team behind her. The air outside was thick with a faint, synthetic odor, and the facility's layout appeared far more advanced than anything Earth Command had encountered. They were in a massive underground complex, a network of darkened hallways and cavernous chambers that stretched deep into the planet's crust. The walls were lined with strange, high-tech devices, their purpose unclear, but their presence ominous. This wasn't just a weapons lab. It was something far more sinister. Whatever Vance had been involved in, it was happening here, and it had to be stopped. Stay sharp, Nayla whispered as they moved deeper into the heart of the facility, their steps echoing off the cold metal floors. We don't know who, or what, is waiting for us. They rounded a corner and encountered their first obstacle. A security checkpoint, heavily fortified with automated turrets and motion sensors. Harrow quickly disabled the systems, his fingers moving with practiced precision over the console. Within moments, the turrets powered down, and the motion sensors fell silent. Clear, Harrow muttered, giving Nayla a nod of confirmation. They pressed forward, moving past the checkpoint and into a large central chamber. At the far end of the room stood a door, its surface marked with the same intricate symbols Nayla had seen in the encrypted transmissions. The same symbols from Vance's message. She knew that beyond this door lay the answers they had been seeking. As they approached, the door slid open with a quiet hiss, revealing a vast, high-tech control room. Screens lined the walls, displaying incomprehensible data. A single figure stood in the center of the room, their back to them. It was a man, tall and imposing, dressed in a dark suit. His face was partially obscured by a hood, but Nella immediately recognized the silhouette. "Vance," she said, her voice low but resolute. The man turned slowly, revealing a smile that sent a chill down Nella's spine. It was Commander Elias Vance, but there was something different about him. His eyes, once cold and calculating, were now filled with a strange intensity, as if he had crossed some invisible line and become something else entirely. "Captain Doran," Vance said, his voice smooth, almost detached. "I was wondering when you'd show up." "What is all of this, Vance?" Nella demanded, her hand instinctively resting on the weapon at her side. "What's the purpose of this facility? And why did you sacrifice your entire crew?" Vance's smile widened. "Sacrifice? Hardly. My crew was always expendable. They were pawns in a much larger game." He paused, walking toward one of the monitors and pressing a series of keys. The screen flickered to life, showing a series of images. Images of Earth, of key military sites, and of high-profile government officials. It was a map, a detailed plan. "This facility," Vance continued, turning to face them, "is the backbone of an operation far beyond your understanding. You see, Earth Command has always operated with the assumption that they control everything. But they've been blind to the larger forces at play, forces that will reshape everything you know." Nella's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? Are you working with the Drith? Is this some kind of alien conspiracy?" Vance chuckled darkly. "The Drith are a tool, not a partner. No, Captain. This goes much deeper. I've been working with a faction within Earth Command, a faction that believes the only way for humanity to evolve is to break free from its shackles, to embrace what lies beyond our own planet." Nella's mind raced. "A faction? You're saying you've been part of an underground movement inside Earth Command all this time?" Vance's eyes gleamed. "You could say that. I was selected for this mission because I'm adaptable. When the opportunity arose to take the weapon, to deliver it here, I knew what had to be done. You saw the weapon's potential, but you couldn't see its true purpose. It's not just a weapon, it's a catalyst. A catalyst for the future of humanity." Nella's stomach churned. "What does it do? What have you set in motion?" Vance stepped closer, his voice now a whisper. "The prototype you saw. It's not just a weapon. It's the key to unlocking humanity's next stage of evolution. Once it's activated, Earth will be forced to change, whether it wants to or not." "Change how?" Harrow's voice was strained. "You're talking about mass destruction." Vance's smile never faltered. "Not destruction. Rebirth." The room seemed to grow colder as the truth began to sink in. This wasn't about alien alliances or revenge. This was about control, about reshaping humanity into something new, something dangerous. But as Vance turned toward the central console, ready to initiate whatever phase of his plan he had prepared, Nella acted without hesitation. Drawing her weapon, she aimed directly at him. "Enough, Vance," she commanded. "This ends now." Vance froze, his hand hovering over the control panel. "You think you can stop this? You think you can stop the inevitable?" "I don't need to stop it all," Nella said, her voice unwavering. "I just need to stop you." With that, the room erupted into chaos.